which I've titled Foundations, Honoring God in the Home, the Church, and the Workplace. All three of these are foundational institutions of society, and they're key for the advancement of God's kingdom. The home, the church, the workplace, all of these are part of God's overarching plan for his kingdom to come. Now, it's quite obvious why the home and the church are so important. I think so, and certainly we've talked about that in the past couple of weeks. But what about the workplace? Isn't the workplace just a necessary evil? Some might say so. Or what about the phrase, living for the weekend? Is there something wrong with that kind of mentality? No doubt work can be hard. That's true whether you have a 9-to-5 or whether you work at home, or even when you're retired. Of course, you still got to mow the lawn, and there's volunteering and maybe working on various projects. Work is always a part of our life in some form or another. And what I want to show you this morning is that it is a good thing that we should lean into and embrace as part of God's good design. And so 2 points, much like the 2 points that we've had in our previous 2 sermons. Number 1, we honor God in the workplace by upholding his good design. And number 2, we honor God in the workplace by living out his good design. Of course, those 2 are very similar, but we'll kind of go from the principle to the practical. And that's what we've been doing in all of these. And so we'll just begin with the first. And again, this 3-part series is much different from what I've typically done. We're not in a specific passage of Scripture. We're going to use a few different passages this morning, but we are going to begin in Genesis, and that's what we've done for all of these, to first show the foundational nature of, in this case, the workplace. And so number 1, we honor God in the workplace by upholding his good design. So you can go ahead and open to Genesis. We'll look at a few places there here in just a moment. I'm sure that most of us have experienced various kinds of work over our lifetime. It's always fun talking with the kids about, oh yeah, I did this once, I did that once. When Emily and I were first married for about 2 years, I was juggling 3 different jobs. And then for a time, as I transitioned from one to another, I had like 4 jobs simultaneously. So I was a part-time youth minister. I taught 3 classes every day at a local Christian school, and I worked at a furniture store and delivered pizzas. And so, that was a very interesting, busy time of life, but actually looking back at it, it was a very joyous time. At least looking back, right? Maybe hindsight is 20/20, but no, I mean, even then, of course, we were newlyweds, and it was just a fun and exciting time. But lest you think that work is a necessary evil, consider the fact that work was introduced into the world before there was even a knowledge of evil. So, first passage this morning, just one verse in Genesis 2:15. It says, "The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it." To work it and keep it. From the very beginning, we see that work was part of God's good design. More specifically, we see what God's good design is in Genesis 1:28. So you'll remember Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are kind of telling the same story about, the creation account and so on. But Genesis 2 focuses in on Adam and Eve there in the garden. So Genesis 2, we read about him putting them in the garden to work it and keep it. But look at Genesis 1:28. It says, "God blessed them, and God said to them, 'Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth.'" He goes on to say that he's giving them every plant that's yielding seed, and so on. We see here specifically that they are to subdue the earth and to exercise dominion. You see those 2 words, particularly there in verse 28. To subdue and to have dominion. right? This is what it is to work the ground. This is what it is to fulfill what we call the creation mandate. So the way I see it is that Adam and Eve and their progeny were to expand the borders of the garden as they subdued the earth and exercised dominion over creation, right? They start there in the garden. Even the garden, they had to work it and to keep it. But then, in a sense, they were to expand those borders, and they were to fill the earth, right? And they were to subdue it and to exercise dominion. And so that was this creation mandate before sin even came on the scene. And this is part and parcel what it is to work. So we still have this creation mandate. The only difference is that now it is much harder due to sin. Right? So we all know the story. Adam and Eve sinned, and then they were kicked out of the garden. And not only that, but look now to chapter 3, verses 17 through 19. Genesis 3:17. And to Adam, God said, "Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, that you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return." Right? So this is what we might call the curse upon creation as a result of Adam and Eve's sin. And it makes things a lot harder, doesn't it? And so really now we see that on this side of it, that our mandate really is twofold. So first of all, we do have that original mandate that was given to Adam and Eve to subdue the earth and to exercise dominion. So think like mowing your lawn, right? Every time you mow your lawn, especially if you do this consciously, right, you are subduing the earth. You are exercising dominion. You are fulfilling this command that was given there in Genesis chapter 1. Isn't that neat to think about? You're taming creation. There's even meaning to what might seem like a meaningless task of mowing your lawn. You're fulfilling the creation mandate to subdue and to exercise dominion. But now there's an added element to it, because not only do we mow our lawns, or at least some of us, I've kind of gotten lazy about this, but spraying for stickers and for weeds and things like that. Now this is really just a physical depiction of all of the troubles that we have now on earth due to sin. But you remember what we just read there in Genesis 3, thorns, it shall bear forth thorns and thistles. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread. So things are a lot harder. And so now our mandate, yes, it's to subdue the earth and exercise dominion, but the second part of it is, well, in a sense, we are called to reverse the curse, or at least to fight against it. Now, of course, ultimately, it is only Jesus who can reverse the curse, right? That's why he came. He came and he lived and he died and he was raised again in order to reverse the curse of sin, right? And so, yes, that's the moral failings that we have, but sin has effects on all of creation, which we saw just there in Genesis 3, right? Even the death and decay and disease and all these things. Jesus came to reverse that, right? So ultimately it's Jesus, but we do play a role in it, right? As we advance God's kingdom, yes, we're spreading the gospel. That's paramount. But maybe incorporated into that, certainly part of our calling is to subdue the earth, to exercise dominion, and to fight against, or to, in a sense, reverse the curse. Kind of like that song that we often sing. We just sang it last week. Until that day comes. All right, we're looking forward to Jesus' return, when he will come and he will set all things right. And we say, but until that day comes, I will go and tell the darkness the light of Jesus Christ is overcome. And until that day comes, I'm going to go to work. I'm adding to the song here. But until that day comes, I'm going to go. I'm going to exercise dominion. I'm going to subdue the earth. I'm going to obey this creation mandate and bring order into the chaos that sin has brought into this world. I'm going to use that as a platform to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is our calling. And so take a moment just to think about your work, right? Whether it's a career or working in the home or volunteering, whatever your work consists of. And let's think of these two questions. First, how is it subduing the earth and exercising dominion? Because if you think hard enough, now granted, maybe some careers, some professions, it might take a little bit more thinking, all right? But in what way is your work subduing the earth and exercising dominion, right? In what way is it taming creation or bringing order to creation or just stewarding the resources that God has given us, right? You're working and keeping the land, as it were, as just like Adam and Eve were. In what way does your work subdue the earth and exercise dominion, right? Of course, you don't have to be literally like working the ground, right? Of course, a lot of what we do now is digital, and it might seem removed from those real hands-on working and keeping kind of things that we think about here in Genesis, but it all kind of goes back to serve the same purpose, right? And so you can kind of chase it down and see, how does my work do this? Or similarly, how is your work a way of reversing the curse, combating death, disease, decay, destruction, combating sin and the effects of sin? It doesn't even have to be an explicitly Christian profession, but of course, as a Christian, you should do that with a Christian worldview and with an end of bringing the gospel to light. So, from landscaping to finance to counseling to construction to nursing to plumbing to security to cosmetology to teaching to technology, all these things and so much more, we can think of ways in which these are obeying this creation mandate to subdue the earth, to exercise dominion, and then furthermore to even reverse the effects of the curse. Of course, ultimately through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so that is kind of the principle of it all, right? We have to understand that it's not just a necessary evil. It's not just living for the weekend, but that our work, whatever it is, has meaning and purpose. And we ought to do that with this biblical Christian worldview. And so we honor God in the workplace by upholding his good design. That is his design. And even before sin came into the world, work was part of God's good design. And now we just have even more to do. Number two, we honor God in the workplace by living out his good design. And so we move now from the principle to the practical, but as we've said in these past two sermons, it all overlaps, doesn't it? By living out his good design. So first, this requires us to actually work, right? In whatever capacity God has called us to. This is especially relevant for me in this season. As you all know, I'm moving into a new kind of ministry, and so that itself is a new kind of work. But there's also a transition period. As I raise support for this new ministry, I'm going to be doing some hustling, kind of like, maybe it'll be like our early days of marriage, with various jobs. And so I'm going to have to self-consciously say, okay, how can I do this as a way to honor God and to fulfill the purposes that he has given to work? And the same is true for all of you. I know that some of you are in some kind of maybe transition, or your work is looking a little bit differently. That happens to all of us at different times. And so we need to always be mindful of, okay, what is God's purpose in this, and how can I live it out? And so yes, first it involves simply working. But whatever work we do, it's important that we do it for the glory of God. And this is something we're going to come full circle to, right? That, and I mean, this goes hand in hand with just seeking to honor God. But for now, let's just consider what it means to live out God's good design in relation to the creation mandate we just discussed, right? So we have the principle of it all in this creation mandate that he gave to Adam and Eve. But how exactly are we to live that out? You've already thought about how your work fulfills this calling to subdue the earth and to exercise dominion, and even to work to reverse the curse as an ambassador of God's kingdom. And so here my challenge is this, that as you work, to be conscious of that, of the higher purpose of your work, whatever it may be. Because, there are plenty of unbelievers who technically in their practice are fulfilling the creation mandate. And so it's more than just simply doing it, but it's about being conscious of it and seeking to honor God through it. Because a lot of unbelievers are unknowingly fulfilling God's creation mandate, right? Say someone who works in medicine, right? They are subduing the earth. They are using the resources of the earth to do something good. And in fact, they are even, in a sense, working against the curse that came upon creation, against disease and death and so on. But it's one thing to do that unknowingly. It's another thing to do that consciously and to do that as an act of worship to God. And so you see the difference between the unbeliever and the believer working in that profession or any profession, right? It's a matter of your mindset and saying, no, I am doing this as a way to fulfill this mandate, as a way to obey what it was commanded from the very beginning, and now specifically from a Christian worldview, to fight against the curse and to bring about God's kingdom ultimately through the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we do it consciously as an act of obedience, right? That's one way that we honor God in the workplace. And then, of course, just the way that we do it is important if we are to honor God in the workplace. Colossians 3:23-24. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. So, in this passage, Paul says, do it as if you were doing it for the Lord. Sometimes we don't want to stick it to the boss man, right? But he says, you're not doing it for him. Ultimately, you are working for the Lord. And so work as if you are working for the Lord. Yes, as if you are working for him to fulfill this creation mandate. But also, kind of the other side of the coin means that you're not doing it as a people pleaser. In fact, that word people pleaser is used just in the previous verse. Or it also says, to not work by way of eye service. Right? We should not be working to please man, but to please God. Which again means that we ultimately have our eyes fixed on God and honoring him. But it also means that, when the boss looks away, that you don't use that as an opportunity to slack off on the job or something like that. It's about integrity. So we are called to work with integrity. Integrity is doing what's right even when it hurts. So integrity can hurt in the short run, but I'm actually convinced that, at least in most cases, that integrity will actually help you in the long run, even when it comes to wealth. So of course, as we work, we're working to make money, to pay the bills. Now this is going to go against the grain from maybe those who say that people who are rich are just a bunch of crooks. But take this for what it's worth. Dave Ramsey has said that a number one trait that creates billionaires is integrity. Now, I doubt any of us here are going to be a billionaire, and it's probably not something we should even aspire to, right? God has certain callings for different people, and that's a very specific, special calling, right? But the point is that, sometimes we might have in our minds, okay, well, you got to be a crook to make it in this world. Well, maybe in the short term, but look into Proverbs, and you'll see that actually having integrity is going to help you. And so, yes, you have integrity first and foremost because it's right. It's the right thing to do, even when it hurts. But what a blessing it is that integrity in the long run will often help, right? It's integrity that's going to earn people's business and trust more so than laziness or deception. And so we work with integrity. We are to be people of integrity. Again, most of all, just because it honors the Lord. And the fact is that some of the people with the most integrity are going to have very little wealth. It certainly is true. But what does the verse say? It says that you are to do this knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. Right? So yes, integrity might very well help you to be successful in your career, but it might hurt you. And, different situations, maybe it's not all that easy to predict. But whatever the case, We are to be people of integrity in order to honor the Lord, and we can trust that, well, in the end, that we will receive an inheritance. That we are working, if we're working ultimately not for man and for God, well, yes, we want to make money to provide for our families and so on, but ultimately we trust in God to provide for us and to give us our eternal reward, but even to provide for us in the temporary things. All right, so let's come full circle now to my comment earlier on working for the glory of God. I shared just a month or two ago that when I was a teenager, that I was encouraged to claim a life verse. Right? Just a verse that is kind of a special mantra for your life, I guess. And so the one that I chose is 1 Corinthians 10:31. And I preached a sermon on this just a month or two ago. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Now the context here is, he's speaking to matters of conscience, like, specifically about eating meat that has been sacrificed to idols and how some may do it, some may not, and he gives some wisdom and insight on that. But he says, whatever you do, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all to the glory of God. Whatever decision you make. But certainly this applies to all of life, right? Whatever you do for your job, for your work, do it for the glory of God. And what this means is that we are to seek to show the greatness of God through our work. Yes, we show the greatness of God to our co-workers and to our clients, right? Like if you are a person of integrity and if you use opportunities to bring to light the gospel of Jesus Christ, that's going to bring glory to God. But then even just when we seek to do the right thing when no one else is watching, that honors God and that brings glory to him. Most of us spend well over a third of our waking hours working, probably well over half if we include household duties and other work outside of a 9-to-5 job. And so for that reason alone, it's important that we seek to honor God in our work, right? It's a big part of our lives. But more than that, I hope you've seen this morning that work is not a necessary evil, but that it's part of God's good design. And so it's not just a matter of how much time we spend doing it, but it's a matter of God's purposes in it all. That it is part of God's good design, and that we must lay hold of that and first uphold that in principle, but then live it out in practice. And then even insofar as our work as a battle against all that has gone wrong with creation, as we fight against the thorns and thistles of creation, that itself is also a good thing. And so, until that day comes, may we work for the higher purposes to which we are called, and may we do it all to the glory of God. And so that's how we are to honor God in the workplace. So the home, and the church, and the workplace, God has ordained all of these. These are all foundational to creation, to society. But most of all, these are ways that he advances his kingdom through these. And so we ought to lean into what his purposes are and seek to live them out. As I come to a close this morning, just want to give you a few words completely unrelated to this, as this is my last sermon. I just want to thank you for your love and support over the years. I want you to know that I truly do love you and will miss you. That you're in my prayers. I want to commend especially our church leaders, our elders and deacons. It's been such a pleasure to serve with you all, and I've told you this in private, but I want to say it in public, that you're good, godly men that I will cherish forever. and I really do feel like I have an eternal bond with you guys. And so I love you all, but I just want to express my thankfulness to both the church and the leaders of the church, and my continued prayers for you. And worship team, if y'all want to go ahead and come on up. I saw that for our closing song this morning that we're singing the blessing, which is actually the blessing that I gave at the end of the last service. What's called the Aaronic blessing, and that is my prayer for you, and I know it's your prayer for me, that the Lord would bless you and keep you, cause His face to shine upon you, be gracious to you, and give you peace. And so it's an appropriate song for us to sing together this morning. So if you go ahead and stand, we'll sing this now.